forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March. For the fans who love the crunch of the pads, prefer a dunk, and expect nothing but the best. It's Bigger 10. Here's Steve Dace.
Greetings. Welcome to this week's Bigger 10. I'm Steve Dace. Aaron McIntyre is here with us as well. Apologies for this week's delayed episode. However, we'll try to make it just as average as every other outing so far of this program has been for you, the people. And let's get to it. There's going to be a singular focus in the Big Five this week on Bigger 10 because it's not every day, particularly 24 hours before National Signing Day. But it's not every day that a guy that so far here in the 21st century, that's a fifth of the way through, 20 years into it, it is absolutely at worst the third best coach of the 20th century in the Big Ten when it comes to Big Ten football. Not every day, a guy that's left the imprint on the conference that Mark Dantonio has steps down. And so now it's time to take a look at why, his legacy, and what could also be next for Michigan State as well, Aaron. And that's where we begin. We begin with whether or not Mark Dantonio is a Hall of Famer. Because I think, people that watch this know I'm a Michigan fan. We're hosting this on the Michigan Podcast channel. But setting fandom aside, when you look at the resume of what he's accomplished in East Lansing, there's only been 11 schools that have made the college football playoff so far, and Michigan State is one of them. 3 Big Ten championships. Would they have, I think, 4 years in a row of 11 wins or more? Mm-hmm. Then you look at what he did at Cincinnati as well. I think Mark Dantonio is an absolute Hall of Famer.
691 win percentage, I believe. I'm sorry, 643 win percentage overall for Mark Dantonio, and I believe isn't the 600 cutoff 600?
Yes.
So it's a hard thing when your win percentage at a high level like this is where it is. It's hard to deny anybody, really, from getting in to the Hall of Fame. But when you do it at a place like Michigan State, which historically, they've had their runs, but historically in this era of college football would not be a powerhouse, especially when you've got this little maize and blue school, next door as well in the same state. That just doesn't happen very often. And I think, I'll talk about this more when we go to the legacy, but just on that alone, the win percentage and where he did it, he definitely has to be at least in serious consideration for the Hall of Fame. That's for sure. I think you're right on the money and if you're a Michigan State fan watching this, we're not intending to patronize you. That may come later, but just looking at his legacy straight up, or his Hall of Fame resume straight up, you have to consider where he did this at. And, if you're a Michigan Stater, you've not had a run like this since Biggie Munn and Duffy Daugherty went back-to-back in the 50s and well into the late 60s. So we're going back about a half century. George Perlis did a fine job at Michigan State. And, we eulogized him a few weeks ago here on the show after he passed away, but Mark Dantonio has been far more impressive. For example, I think George Perlis, I want to say, was 4-8 against Michigan, and Mark Dantonio is going to walk away 8-5. You look at George Perlis had one outright Big Ten championship. He shared another in 1990, a year that 4 Big Ten teams shared the title. Well, Mark Dantonio is coached in an era where there's no such thing as shared championships, and he won 3 of them outright at Michigan State. He's the winningest coach of all time at Michigan State, and he accomplished that in 13 years. So yeah, I think when you look at what he's done, it's the most sustained success this program has had since before I was born, before Aaron was born, before a lot of people watching here were born. When a lot of Americans didn't have a color television set was the last time Michigan State was this consistently excellent. So to me, absolute Hall of Famer based on the resume, no doubt. But that brings us now, Aaron, to the legacy aspect of this. And
There's a reason you don't typically see a coach quit 24 hours before National Signing Day. Because there's only two reasons that a coach does that. One is a serious health or family situation that requires immediate attention. The other is bad. And I don't think it's any coincidence at all. And I'll get your take on this first before we go on to other parts of his legacy. But I don't think it's any coincidence at all that Mark Dantonio stepped aside literally like 15 minutes after his former assistant coach, Curtis Blackwell, said in a sworn deposition in a civil lawsuit that he's filed against Dantonio and Michigan State that he was personally witness to multiple NCAA violations committed by Mark Dantonio and his program while he was an assistant coach at Michigan State. And I mean, it was like 15 minutes later that Mark Dantonio put this out on Twitter. His coaching staff had no idea that this was coming whatsoever. So I don't think this has been in the works since he got his longevity clause. Now, I don't hold it against him for retiring after that longevity clause. That was given to him for what he's already done. Not to mention that's kind of just that's probably about what a buyout would have been anyway, right? You know what I'm saying? So it's 6 1/2 dozen of the other. Who cares if it's, you want to call it a longevity clause or a buyout? That's what he would have gotten either way. So I think it works out in the wash. But the timing of this, with winter conditioning ongoing, it's National Signing Day. I think they had 3 players they were waiting to hear from the next day, including a guy that would have been their top-ranked prospect. Quitting like that when he did and the way that he did in the hurried fashion, I don't think it's any coincidence that it comes minutes after Curtis Blackwell made those allegations under oath. And here's something else as a follow-up to that is Tom Mars, who's made a name for himself going after Ole Miss, and then suing to get Shea Patterson eligible at Michigan. He's kind of the guy you go to if you've got an issue with the NCAA. In fact, the NCAA got so sick of losing to Tom Mars, they hired him to help run their enforcement division beginning this year. All right. So he's working, I think, on the college basketball fallout scandal as we speak. Well, he's still a private attorney. And Tom Mars this week, Aaron, announced that he is joining Curtis Blackwell's legal team. And the quote that he gave was, "Hey, if I thought Curtis Blackwell was the one lying here, I wouldn't be doing this." Now, he didn't say that means he thinks Mark Dantonio is lying about denying it, but that's the clear implication, right? So when anybody's legacy is at least partially shaped by the way that they go out. What's their last parting shot that they're remembered by? And that's certainly going to shape Dantonio's legacy as well, because this story's not yet finished either. This civil suit is still ongoing.
There's no question that it's correlated. I mean, the number of things you'd have to believe in order for it not to be, I just think is astronomical, and it's kind of a fool's errand to try to go down that road. But this is definitely going to shape his legacy, and this is where we get into talking about things like not finishing well, and that almost always is the case when it comes to college football. I mean, you look at very few instances of things ending well, where you just get to walk off the field because one of a few things happens. Either a guy doesn't know when to call it quits, either it does something wrong, or either he starts losing quite a bit. And I guess the first and the third things are kind of, they're probably correlated there as well. But this definitely looks like it's going to go down the second path, where it's not looking good. And when you couple this together with the PED thing that affected Michigan State during the course of the year.
That's your senior captain, Joe Bashi.
Yeah, exactly. And just the overall...
the Austin Robertson, the sexual assault issues with the Detroit players and how that destroyed their 2016 class.
There's just a pall over this program right now. And that's... Unfortunately, it appears like that's going to be part and parcel to his legacy. Doesn't take away what he's been able to coach on the field, which, as we'll talk a little bit more. I mean, I think... aside from this, I mean, the legacy of Mark Dantonio, aside from this again, is one of making hay while the sun shines. And not many coaches can actually do that. I mean, he took advantage and sustained success at a time when Michigan was, for the most part, kind of down and out. And he was able to sustain. I'm always going to default back to my Iowa Hawkeyes, but it seems like the years that they've been able to take a step, they have never been able to sustain, unlike a Wisconsin or an even harder job like Michigan State as well. And he's done that, and thanks in part to having the right conditions at the right time, I think, in some instances, but just being able to take that next step, that's nothing to sneeze at whatsoever.
Well, there's no question that Michigan's back-to-back coaching misfires helped the cause. Okay, that's not even debatable. I mean, one of the things we've seen over the years is, Judd Heathcote can be highly successful at Michigan State, while Michigan has Glenn Rice and the Fab Five. There's enough, because you're only putting 5 basketball players on the court at the same time. There's enough talent in the Big Ten footprint in basketball for Michigan and Michigan State to both be upper level programs. In the last few years of the John Beilein era, I mean, that was probably, next to Duke and North Carolina, the 2 most successful in-state programs in college basketball. Okay. Football, though, we've never seen both Michigan and Michigan State consistently both at a high level. We've had I think John L. Smith's first year at Michigan State, both teams were in the top 10 back in 2003. You'll get one of those every now and then, but most of the time, what we've seen for the last half century or so is that if Michigan has its act together, Michigan State can rise up, cycle up every few years, but it just consistently can't sustain that level. That's why Nick Saban left and went to LSU, because he knew he couldn't do it consistently at Michigan State. And this guy, so he got an opening. Michigan gave him the opening, no doubt about that. But he deserves credit for exploiting fully that opening, right?
Yep.
So, Michigan being down doesn't have much to do with beating Stanford in a Rose Bowl or beating Ohio State in the Big Ten championship. It helped you get there, no question about it, but you still had to go there and close the sale in elite games, or beating Baylor in a Cotton Bowl. And so he's exploited it. Now, what's different between him and, say, Tom Izzo, because Tom Izzo got started kind of the same way. His program got off to a rocky start, succeeding Judd Heathcote. Michigan was at its, was recruiting. Well, we learned they were recruiting certain ways after the fact, Mr. Ed Martin. But, when Michigan went on probation and vacated those wins, Michigan State locked down the state and took off. But here's the true test, though. When John Beilein got Michigan's program going, I went and looked this up last year. So the second decade of Tom Izzo's career at Michigan State is when John Beilein really had it cooking at Michigan. Tom Izzo was actually averaging more wins a season when John Beilein was at his best than he was the 10 years before Beilein arrived, when Michigan was in the basketball wilderness. What you've seen with Michigan State football, though, is the opposite. Since Jim Harbaugh has arrived at Michigan, what have we seen? A precipitous decline. And I think that 2016 class where they brought in, Austin Robertson, despite all of the warning signs and the way that class fell apart, what I really think happened there is he saw all the buzz Michigan was getting, the way Harbaugh was recruiting right away. And I think they got outside of their brand, outside of their identity of, let's get a few 4-stars in there, but let's find, guys who are very athletic but haven't been molded yet and develop them, and that was his MO. And I think they tried to step up in weight class on the recruiting trail, didn't do the vetting from a character standpoint in the program. And I think that was the beginning of the wrecking of Michigan State football. And I think another part of his legacy too is I don't know that the program right now isn't even in worse shape than it was when he took it over, despite his success, because they don't have a quarterback on the roster. Pretty much every player you knew on defense that was any good the last couple of years is graduated or went to the NFL. They've lost a lot of talent and experience. You look at this past recruiting class was, I think, ranked below Cincinnati in the group of 5. The timing of this is terrible because 2021, it could be one of the greatest in-state recruiting hauls the state of Michigan has had in several years. There's multiple top 100 overall prospects coming out of the state of Michigan this year. You don't typically see more than 1 or 2. There might be 4 or 5. So this is a terrible year to put a new coaching staff behind the 8 ball with so much in-state talent that he likely won't have, a connection in order to recruit and get. there, and then the Big Ten is a lot tougher now too, because we were just talking about just Michigan rising up, but keep in mind that a lot of those years that he was surging, Penn State was kind of down too, digging out of the Sandusky controversy. Keep that in mind. And so now you're in the division. They've realigned the division since then, from leaders and legends to the East, and now you've got Ohio State, who's always great, but you've got Michigan and Penn State now operating at full capacity as well. That wasn't the case when he came to East Lansing back in 2007. So I'm not so sure another part of his legacy is not just that he had the best success they've had in 50 years, but he might have left the program in worse shape than he found it.
Yeah, and that is unfortunate. And I try so hard not to sound concerned trolling here. They're in the other division, but that really is unfortunate if you are a Michigan State fan that you have been. You were in the college freaking football playoff back in 2015, and it's really hard. It is really hard for programs if you're not an Alabama, an Ohio State, a Michigan, Florida, these big blue blood programs to just reload. I don't care. You just don't win. You don't have a really good season of success and then just reload. They did have a really good recruiting class after that, but that's completely fallen apart as well. And now you're basically left in shambles. The best thing, and this all hinges upon what we'll be talking about next. The best thing that I can say for Michigan State football right now is that there is a brand right there now. At least there is some sort of brand. But that's got to be reinforced within the next 1 or 2 seasons, or this is going to get really bad really fast.
And what could impact that too, are they looking at NCAA sanctions? We've got to, listen, I'm a Michigan fan. I can tell you a little bit about what happens under sworn testimony when someone says we committed NCAA violations. It's called Chris Webber at the Ed Martin trial. All right. So I know a little bit about that. I got some first-person experience with that. And I absolutely believe there's going to be an NCAA investigation, especially when the guy that's representing Curtis Blackwell right now, or one of his attorneys, is on the NCAA's enforcement staff. So I wonder, and we'll get to coaching replacements in just a little bit, but that ties into here as well. It looked like it was going to be Luke Fickell from Cincinnati right away. Well, because of some scheduling problems, this week's episode is delayed 2 days. And, we're heading into almost a full week since Dantonio has made this announcement, and nothing out of Cincinnati. Already had Pat Narduzzi say no, who was probably the Buddy Ryan, if you know the old school NFL reference, probably the Buddy Ryan of Mark Dantonio's Mike Ditka. He was their celebrated defensive coordinator that helped get that Michigan State program established and that brand of a nasty defense established. And he's already said he's staying put at Pitt. And I think a part of that is, are they facing NCAA sanctions? At the very least, I think there's going to be an investigation, Aaron.
Yes, and here's where I see this going. I think this is either going to impact Michigan State even more, or maybe even proportionally more than anything involving Jerry Sandusky at Penn State, or there's going to be chiclets. I don't think there's any, because when you get into paying players, I think if you're the NCAA, or not the NCAA, I'm sorry. I think if you're whatever governing body, is it the College Football Association, whatever it is.
It's the NCAA with college football.
With college football.
Yeah.
Whatever governing body. It's a lot easier to make an example out of a place like Michigan State than it is a place like Penn State. And paying players right now, that's a huge no-no. I don't think I don't think that needs to be said at all. And so I think either they're going to make an example out of Penn State, or this is going to be chiclets at the end of the day.
Which brings us to, where would we rank this job? So I'm going to take my first stab at this and then let you kind of go from there. To me, I think there's an absolute in our league. There's two absolutes in our league. And that is that Ohio State is always the best job in the Big Ten. I mean, when you look at until they, brought the NHL team in here in the last decade or so, this was the largest television market in America, I believe, that didn't have a major professional sports team, Columbus, Ohio. So when you throw all of that money, corporate cash, booster money there, and there's not a lot of, sporting competition for it, that they're always going to have the best of the best. You throw in now, recruiting's been down in the state of Ohio the last couple of cycles, but historically, this has been demographically the strongest state in our footprint. You look at the tradition they have as well. And then I would say that Ohio State is probably, and I want to be as fair as I can here, acknowledging my bias as a Michigan fan, because we don't have anything like the SEC up here, okay? But they're probably the closest we have in terms of the mindset of whatever in Big Ten land we consider doing what it takes to win. Now, that means something different in the Big Ten than it means down in the SEC. Can we stipulate to that at least?
Yeah.
But is it fair to say they're probably the most willing to define that in the Big Ten? Just even little things like when Urban Meyer came to our league and started recruiting kids that were verbally committed to other schools. And remember how Brett Bielema and a few other coaches in the league were losing their minds over that. We didn't do that in the Big Ten. And Urban Meyer's like, dude, I'm from the SEC. We recruit to the whistle, and then sometimes after the whistle's over, if you know what I'm saying, you know? And that's kind of what I mean is that there's a level of aggression and willingness to push boundaries there that in the SEC they would, think like, dude, you're blushing over that. But in the Big Ten, sometimes those things have been kind of considered tawdry. And so when you throw in that mentality and then all the natural inherent advantages they have, you're talking about a school that since Woody Hayes won his first national title in the mid-1950s, they've won something, I think I did the math, it was like 76% of their games under 6 different head coaches. That's the best record in all of college football, and it's not even close. So I think let's start with that. Do we both stipulate unquestionably, regardless of situation, Ohio State's the best job in the league? Yep. All right, then stipulation number 2 is I think Penn State and Michigan are the next 2 best jobs. And it's just a matter of where you think those 2 programs are at a given time, administratively, et cetera, which one you'd put 2 and which one you'd put 3. So I think a lot of years you would have put Penn State 2 because the better in-state recruiting base. But Pennsylvania's high school football has gone downhill as well. So I think it's debatable who's in that next tier. And both of those would be considered top 10, 15-ish jobs in all of college football. But I think that's the other absolute, is that Penn State and Michigan, depending on which order you put them in, are the next 2 best jobs.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I actually ranked all 14 teams. You can feel free to agree, disagree, question, comment, insult.
Because I think it's very fluid from there. So let me see your list after that.
I agree as well. It's really, anywhere from, I believe, 5 to like 11. You could make debates for any of those teams. But I do have Wisconsin. So I have Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, 1, 2, and 3. I think Wisconsin, as long as Barry Alvarez is there and kind of guiding the ship, that's just a good job. You've got, a decent recruiting base.
Provided you're willing to do it Barry's way.
Yeah. Exactly. You've got a decent recruiting base, not much competition in that state. Nebraska, for some reason, that block N just still pulls in. I mean, they have good recruiting as well, and you've got a really, really, really passionate fan base.
And they had like 4 straight top 25 classes,
yep.
and they haven't been to a bowl game in 3 years, right?
Really, really passionate fan base, which can be a good or bad thing, but at least in Nebraska right now, it's still a good thing. I think Iowa has proven, if you win 7 to 9 games a year, and do that pretty consistently, you're going to have a job there.
All right, let's pause there for a second. I'm fine with Wisconsin and Nebraska there. I think we could debate like Penn State and Michigan, which one is 4 and which one is 5, okay? Yeah. If you're looking at it historically, you'd put Nebraska higher. But if you're looking at it right now, I understand why Wisconsin would be there. Iowa as a job seems to me like it depends on how you're looking at it.
Yep.
If I'm assessing this as a media person and just looking at, can I win a national championship there? Blah, 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 blah. I don't know that I have them the 6th best job in the Big Ten. But if I'm a head coach,
yes,
I might. Because of what you were about to say, which is they've had 2 head coaches since 1978, Hayden Fry and Kirk Ferentz.
Yep.
Okay. So think about it. Just to put that in perspective, Iowa has had 2 head coaches since Mork and Mindy introduced Robin Williams to the world. Think about that.
Right.
Okay. So what Iowa does show is maybe you can't sustain long-term national success.
Right.
But if you stay clean and are respectable year in and year out, That is a university and its administration that has shown they will write you a check forever. So if I'm a coach, I probably do have a high view of the Iowa job.
And that's kind of how I'm looking at this right now as well. You know, if I'm not going to be able to get one of the top 4 jobs, where am I going to be able to just stick around the longest? You know,
raise a family, have a nice in a nice community, make a good living,
have a chance to compete at a high level. You know, that's a pretty good place. Now this might change depending on the sanctions, but I've got Michigan State at number 7, the 7th best job. So in the lowest of the upper half of the Big Ten, kind of middle of the pack, middle echelon Big Ten. Maryland, I mean, I could have put Minnesota at number 7 as well. Maryland, I've got at number 8 because of the area that they have. They should be able to recruit that fairly well. Mm-hmm. Minnesota is still a little bit low, but I think it is definitely rising. I think the more sustained success they can have up there, the better. Obviously, that job will become, because I lived up there for a long time, and this is true of basically any college or a school as well, which is if they don't win their first 2 or 3 games, attendance up there is just sparse and nobody gives a rip, which can be a good or bad thing. But I'm just looking at, you know, is there juice in that program? And right now there is, and they're on the uptick. Illinois should be higher. That's all I'm going to say at 10. They should be higher with Chicago around there. Purdue, again, you can make an argument of having.
I know what you're saying with Illinois. They're probably where they should be, or probably where they deserve to be. But, you know, Bino Cook used to say for years, Illinois and Missouri were the 2 teams he couldn't figure out why they didn't win more often than they did. Okay, yeah. So they're probably where they deserve to be ranked. But I understand what you mean. They should be higher than that, given some of their demographic advantages. Yeah. Right.
Purdue, Indiana, 11 and 12. Rutgers, 13. They should be higher again in the area that they are. Northwestern's always going to be the worst job, and it's a wonder because they have Pat Narduzzi right now. Or not Pat Narduzzi. It's a Friday. Pat Fitzgerald.
That's my man crush now. Be careful with that. All right, now put that list back up on the screen. Two that I want to bicker with for a minute.
Sure.
Minnesota is now on its 3rd straight head coach, 4th straight, because I forgot Tracy Claeys was there for a couple of years. Yeah. So Glenn Mason did it, Jerry Kill did it, Tracy Claeys, and now PJ Fleck. Minnesota's on its 4th straight head coach that's been able to win 9 or more games in a season, 4 years in a row. Yeah. And when you look at what they've done up there, because you were living up there with the commuter rail and everything else, their facilities. I'm a Michigan fan. I'm jealous of a couple of their student living facilities. As long as we have the current divisional alignment, I think Minnesota should be higher. I'm not so sure, especially when I factor in, I don't have to put up with a fan base that's just absolutely insane. I'm not so sure I wouldn't put Minnesota up there like 5th.
Yeah, that's again a compelling case, but you could also look at it and say they're on their 4th straight coach that's won 9 games or more at Minnesota. Yep. And I'm looking at that. Well, what more do I have to do? You know, especially if you're somebody like Tracy Claeys. I helped to resurrect this program under Jerry Kill, and I'm getting shown the door after something like that. I would. That would give me pause a little bit, but I think your case is as solid as any.
Maryland, I would drop. But I think Maryland's like Illinois. It should be that high. With the DMV and everything. That's the one area in our footprint that demographically is growing. And you're seeing those top few schools there that you have listed are hammering that area in recruiting right now. But except for one era with Ralph Friedgen, when has Maryland football, going back to well before you were born, in the 80s when Bobby Ross and stuff was the coach there, and Frank Reich and Boomer Esiason were their quarterbacks. Except for one era under Ralph Friedgen, when have they ever shown they can be consistently good? So I kind of would put Maryland in the same group as in Illinois. They should be that high, but no one has really cracked the code there. And I think they're the opposite of Minnesota. As long as the divisional alignment remains what it is, I'd raise Minnesota. And as long as the divisional alignment is what it is, I would lower Maryland. Because, it's similar to Rutgers. They're going to be the 3rd or 4th choice for a lot of the top players in their own recruiting footprint.
Yeah, and again, it's a good case. If I'm a prospective coach, an up-and-coming coach, though, I see the Under Armour money. I see the area that you're in Maryland with the recruiting in the DMV, and I say, boy, this is an opportunity for aggressive expansion, something like that. But you can make a case for that with Minnesota as well, and I don't, I have them worse or lower than Maryland. So
Northwestern's interesting to me because I think they're similar to Iowa in that, first of all, they've had two different head coaches now win Big Ten championships this century. Okay. So you had Randy, I forgot his name, who passed away tragically, and then Pat Fitzgerald succeeded him. So they've had two coaches this century win Big Ten titles. And then they had Gary Barnett do it in the late 90s. You throw in I think Stanford showed that you can use your academic prowess as a unique recruiting pitch, because you're going after a certain kind of student athlete that a lot of other schools aren't. So I'm fine with them being 14th. I understand the logic behind it, but I think they have shown that if you have the right Randy Walker, that's what I was thinking of. If you have the right fit there, you can actually, and they have, that's another school that has a gorgeous new student facility right there on Lake Michigan. So, I mean, I'd rather coach at Northwestern than Rutgers. I'll say that. I at least would put them ahead of Rutgers. Yeah.
And it is the academic thing that put them right there. And man alive, would you want to, I don't know how big of a deal, fan support is necessarily all the time with coaching, but good grief, sleepy Evanston, that can be an advantage, but you want to, that can be advantage to put the others asleep, kind of like the pink locker rooms at Iowa or something like that.
Sure.
But at the same time, I don't know, if I had my choice between Northwestern and the rest of the one, up to 8, I don't think I'd want to go coach my game day in sleepy Evanston. But you make a good case. And as far as the athletic training facility goes, holy cow! If this was a power ranking of the best athletic facilities in the Big Ten, I want to freaking live there. That place is amazing.
So put the list up one more time and let's do a little test. Let's go to a guy like, say, let's use Jeff Brom. Okay. Who is probably the hot shot coach that came into our league and has taken the most moribund job in recent years because of where the Purdue program was at when he took over. Okay, which was even worse than Illinois was when Lovie Smith took over. And Jeff Brom was an up and coming name, unlike Lovie Smith. Okay, so let's do this. I'm going to put you in Jeff Brom's case. Let's say Jeff Brom was leaving. Was leaving Western Kentucky now for a job in the Big Ten. All right. And these jobs are open. Michigan State versus the following schools with the current division alignment, possible NCAA investigation. Okay. Yep. All that on the table. All right. You're Jeff Brom, Michigan State or Minnesota.
With the caveat of the possible sanctions, I'm going Minnesota all day.
Agreed. Michigan State or Purdue?
Purdue.
I'm taking Purdue.
Yeah.
Michigan State or Northwestern?
Probably Northwestern. Again, with the caveat of possible sanctions, which I did this kind of without that.
Because here's the thing: even if there's no sanctions, here's where this can kill you as a coach. If and this brings us to the replacement now. Okay, so let's say you're Luke Fickell, and according to 24/7 Sports, Cincinnati, where Luke Fickell is at, just signed the best class ever by a Group of 5 program. I think they're 40th overall in the country, ahead of Michigan State right now. If you're Luke Fickell, you're going in there, and it's mid-February. And remember now, guys can start taking official visits in the spring now because of the new calendar. And and you're seeing all these Big Ten schools. I don't think it's any coincidence now we've got Wisconsin, Iowa, Minnesota, Purdue signing top 25 classes now with the advent of the earlier calendar, because now we get to bring these kids up when it's nice up here in the Midwest and not just, in January when there's 30 feet of snow on the ground and it's desolation, right? So you've got an outlier strong in-state recruiting class. Even if they don't give you major sanctions, just in fact, there's a threat of an investigation. It's going on, and you don't know what the penalties will be. Maybe you get hammered, maybe you won't. If you're already taking over a roster that's lost a lot of experience, you're going into Michigan needs to recruit a lot of the best players in the state of Michigan, but it can survive losing several of them because they can go national. Michigan State has to dominate. Michigan State basically has to get every good player in Michigan that Michigan doesn't get. They almost have to get almost every single one of them. And if you're behind you just had a bad, so you're walking in where they just had a bad class. You're behind the 8 ball with the next class. Let's say it takes the NCAA a full year, and even if they come back and say, you know what, it's a minor infraction, it's not a big deal, what have you. But now you're behind the 8 ball with the 2022 class. The threat of that looming investigation there. Listen, look at what happened to Al Golden at Miami. This is what happened to him. Now, what's being alleged at Michigan State is nowhere near what Miami was caught with, okay? But the threat of that hanging over your program, I think he won't even entertain the job unless he were to get like a deal like Matt Rule got at Baylor, like 8-year guaranteed contract, because who knows how they're going to recruit the first couple of seasons.
Yeah, I mean, you're coming into this situation where you would be leaving a draft class that is better than the one that you're going to be inheriting. Recruiting class that you're going to be inheriting. So you're thinking, I worked so hard, my staff worked so hard to get all these guys to come to a group of 5 school, and I'm leaving that to go to a division inside one of the toughest conferences, probably the first or second toughest conference in the country, and the toughest division inside that conference. What's in this for me at this point, other than a potential huge payday contract situation, which after, and I don't want to get into all this, but after all the athletic department in that school has paid out with the Nassar and all of these other instances as well, who knows if they even have that kind of coin.
And, there's another angle to this too, is the state attorney general in Michigan announced yesterday, they're going to investigate the sexual assault allegations in the basketball program at the state attorney general's office. Yeah. Okay. So if you're Luke Fickell, you've done a hell of a job at Cincinnati. And I think they've got the best group of 5 program returning in 2020 in my early ratings. If he has another season like he just had, I mean, he's going to have his pick of a lot of jobs next year. And I don't think they're going to get him. I think if he was going to take the job, because here's the thing too, if you're a coach with an existing team, spring practice is going to start here in a few weeks. He just signed, by the way, a quarterback rated in the top 100 in 24/7 Sports at Cincinnati. So maybe you can get some of these guys to come with you like PJ Fleck did, but you've got to get waivers about whether they can play right away and everything else. I mean, PJ Fleck brought a lot of his recruits from Western Michigan with him to Minnesota, and that helped to fortify that in-between class, when you're coming in. But every day that you don't leave your job where you're doing winter conditioning and prep for spring ball, the harder it gets, because this is when teams bond. This is when identities are built and forged with college football teams, is this time of year. And here's why I think in the end, Aaron, how this is going to end. I think they're either going to make Jim Tressel's little brother, I think it's Mike Tressel, who is the interim coach right now. I think he's going to be named the interim coach for next season. Or they'll give him like a Tracy Clay's got at Minnesota 2 or 3 year contract with almost no penalty if they wanted to fire him and get rid of him, just in case he hits it off and they have a good year and he can recruit off of that, because you can't do that if he's carrying an interim tag.
Yeah,
that's what I think is going to happen. I think if Mark Dantonio had announced after the final game of the regular season that the Pinstripe Bowl was going to be my last game, I think Luke Fickell would be the next coach at Michigan State. But I think when you throw in the timing, and here's the other thing too, they should have settled the damn lawsuit with Curtis Blackwell. I mean, the fact they let it get to this point, and now you've got a member of the NCAA's enforcement division representing Curtis Blackwell in court. There's just, if you're Luke Fickell, man, you want me to walk into this and oh, by the way, Indiana's got like the best team returning they've had in like 30 years. Okay, so I've got Indiana I'm worried about now, and then Penn State, I've got James Franklin, Jim Harbaugh, and especially Ryan Day. I don't think he's taken that job. I don't. I think that's why it hasn't happened by now.
Yeah, I think if you're Michigan State at this point in time, if you're the athletic director there, you need to figure out pretty quickly what your expectations are long-term for your football program in that division. And that's just impossible to do at this point because, for one thing, you're in that, you just mentioned the division that you're in. You don't know what the divisions are going to look like, if there's even going to be divisions with the new commissioner. So that might change your expectations for your football program as well. And then once you have your expectations set, you got to figure out who you can hire to best meet those at any given time. And you just can't do that at this point in time. So whoever it is as a placeholder, whether it's Tressel, Mike Tressel, or whether it's somebody else you got to find a placeholder for right now. Try to tread water at this point, and then try to get your actual boy, your golden boy, whoever that ends up being, into your program later on.
We'll come back and play our weekly game of Would You Rather next year on Bigger 10.
Bigger 10 is brought to you by Michigan Podcast. If you like what you're hearing today and would like to support us, head on over to Patreon, patreon.com/Michigan Podcast, where if you live somewhere where sports wagering is illegal, you can find Steve's picks for various games. So far in basketball, college basketball this year, he's been on fire. That's patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. You can get his game day picks, which he posts almost every day now for just $5 a month. In the process, you can say thank you for creating this podcast on YouTube or via podcast, wherever you listen. Patreon.com/Michigan Podcast.
All right, let's play some Would You Rather, Aaron. This one is for you. Would you rather be guarded by Brad Davison or have your wisdom teeth pulled? Which would you rather have?
See, this would change if I was older. But right now it'd have to be wisdom teeth pulled, which I did not enjoy.
You're taking your manhood in your own hands if you let yourself be guarded by Brad Davison.
I would like to have children at some point in the future. So, if this was further down the road, fine, I'll take the pain, whatever. But at this point in time, priorities. And so I would rather have my wisdom teeth pulled than be guarded by Brad Davison.
It still blows me away that the dude code has not enforced some street justice on Brad Davison for antics like that.
No kidding.
In order to, shall we say, discourage them in the future, if you know what I'm saying.
No kidding. This one's for you. Would you rather have Brad Davison or Grayson Allen on your team?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm going to, because you know what? Here's the thing that's lost in all of this with both these guys is they're very gifted players. Brad Davison's not a goon. Brad Davison can ball, man. He is a baller. He's a very good player. But I think Grayson Allen is a far more gifted, pure athlete than Brad Davison is. So I'll go with Grayson Allen. But that, I see what you did there. I liked how you finger rolled on that one. I liked it.
Would have been the same answer for the same reasons as well.
For you, would you rather win the Big Ten regular season basketball title or the Big Ten basketball tournament?
There's no question the regular season basketball title. Well, for one thing, you're actually taking into the equation the totality of the season and what you were able to accomplish from stem to stern and inside the conference schedule. I think that's more meaningful. I don't know. It's just more meaningful on the whole than just winning the tournament. And I really don't think I'd have to do a little bit more research on this, but I really don't think that just getting on a roll, if you're in the tournament already, in the NCAA tournament, I really don't think that winning 4 or 5 games in 5 days has a huge impact. Like, you're not going to go from a 5 to a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament by winning your conference tournament. Now, you might go from a 2 to a 1 seed if you've won your conference and you win your tournament as well. That could happen, but I just don't think there's a huge bump from winning your conference tournament. So I'd rather get the regular season basketball championship.
Most Big Ten basketball fans would say the same thing.
Yeah. Would you rather be Rutgers athletic director right now or the Michigan State athletic director?
Oh, gosh. Actually, can I go back to that last question? I think whatever one we won, that's the one I want to win.
There you go.
Yeah, that's maybe the answer. But you know what? I can't believe I'm saying this, man. But I think I'd rather be the Rutgers AD. I think football has a coach. I have no idea how successful Greg Schiano will be, but it will be respectable. Like there's an adult in charge there, if you know what I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. Okay. A guy the boosters know, the community knows, he's been successful there before. I don't have to babysit that now. All right, I hand that off to him, and I see what it looks like in 3 or 4 years. I've got Steve Peichel, who's a hell of a basketball coach right now. I've sold out all of my games at home at that rack the rest of the year. We're coming up in the era now where we're going to start getting full vested shares, revenue shares from the Big Ten now. We're getting close to that time. So, and I think with the AG office getting involved now, it wouldn't shock me if we're sitting here within the next 12 months and Tom Izzo decides maybe it's time for him to spend some more time with his family too. You look at the administrative mess with the fallout of Nasser and everything else. I can't believe I'm saying this, man, but I'd rather be the Rutgers AD. I cannot believe I'm saying this, but
that is pretty astounding.
I would rather be the Rutgers AD. Yeah. We'll come back. One final segment is next. Stay tuned.
Bigger Ten is also brought to you by Wolverine Digest from Sports Illustrated. You can find that at wolverinedigest.com. For all of you Michigan fans, you can find a daily rundown of all the hottest topics from basketball and football to recruiting and much, much more. That's wolverinedigest.com, a part of Sports Illustrated.
This week's Twitter poll results, we asked you, do you agree with the Big Ten's proposal to let every college athlete in every sport transfer one time for any reason without having to sit out? Everybody can do this in the NCAA except for basically football and basketball players. 84% of you said yes. Just 16% of you said no. I think that is coming down the pike with the Big Ten supporting it. Probably as soon as 2021, I think we'll see it. Let's get to this week's question of the week. This is from Jay Irwin. Along the lines of the poll we just had, Aaron. If coaches don't have to sit out when they leave, why do players have to when they transfer? Well, I'll get your answer in a second. Players and coaches aren't morally equivalent here. I mean, one's the boss and one's not. That being said, though, let me put this question a different way. If I'm in the music program and there's a better violin instructor at blank U compared to the where I'm at right now, no one makes me sit out from being first chair in the school orchestra, university orchestra, because I'm a transfer. I don't have to do that. The only place anywhere in a university setting where I have to do that is football and basketball. And I think that's the better argument against this, Aaron.
I agree as well. And, you know, this is not utopia. This is real life. And so for whatever reason, whether or not it's just, you know what I got here, this is not the place for me. Any number of reasons, you know, once you get out of college, once football season is over, do you think some of these guys ever start a job and it's like, you know what, this is not for me. I think I'm gonna. Mm-hmm. Do they have the option? Do they have the freedom and liberty to go somewhere else? Mm-hmm. You bet your sweet bippy, if they have marketable skills and talents to do so, they do that. I do kind of get the it's not really an argument. It's more of a sentiment than anything. There's a story here in Iowa media where they offered this football player, I think when he was a sophomore or junior in high school, a scholarship. This guy got injured. I believe he broke he had a spinal injury, which he recovered from miraculously, and he can walk again and do all this, but he's not going to be able to play football again. And Iowa is honoring his scholarship. So there's a two-way street commitment there, mm-hmm. where Iowa is still honoring his scholarship, even though he's not going to be able to do what they expected or had intended him to do for them. So I understand that there's this sentiment, but you know what? That's a 1 in 1,000 story. Right. That's just not reality in the big picture of things. So I think it's better to go down the road of, you know what? You screwed up this one time, you can go, or you just don't like this for whatever reason. It's up to you. You're an adult. You're 18 years old or older. You can make your own decisions. But you just, I don't think hopping around. I think a one-time deal. I think that's sufficient. Hopping around, I don't think is very good at all.
Agreed. That's going to do it for this week's episode of Bigger Ten. Please like, rate, and subscribe, whether it's YouTube or the various podcasting platforms. However you access us every week, please like, rate, and subscribe, and share it. And share those likes and share these links with everybody you know that also wants to follow on what's going on with the Big Ten. For Aaron McIntyre, I'm Steve Dace. We'll be back again next week.